Welcome, everybody. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. My name is Ellen. I'm the chair of the, excuse me, C&CS committee. This is the 11th or 12th, I think, series in Can't Hide Behind Not Being Controversial. And tonight, or this evening, because it's still light, I can't say tonight, is called Tiny Houses, Housing Ministry Options for Your Church. So we are blessed to have Kevin Polk with us, and he has a good biography that you could look at, but I'm going to just say a few words about it. He's the president of the American Tiny House Association and recently received a small grant from our presbytery to research and plan an affordable housing ministry that will be operated by Sherman Oaks Presbyterian. By the end of this presentation, he will undoubtedly, I love this, try to talk you into helping out with that by establishing a small 5,000-ish affordable housing endowment at your church. Ask him for the details if you feel so led. So before we begin, Kevin, I'm going to ask Carol to say a prayer.
Okay, please pray with me. Great and holy God of love, creation, sustenance, salvation, grace, and justice, we ask that you be with us as we learn about the tiny house aspect of housing the homeless. Open our minds and hearts to possibilities and opportunities. We give you thanks for the technology that makes this time together possible, and we ask your blessing upon our time together. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you. Kevin, you're on.
Okay, great. Let me see if I can get the share screen going here. Okay. There we go. Okay, can everybody see that screen? The screen there?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that kind introduction. I have been blessed to be at in a position to help Sherman Oaks Presbyterian Church develop a new way of paying for what it does, and help create that plan. And we've had a lot of success, and that has led us to looking at another source of revenue beyond the main things that have been paying for us. And so I am looking forward to talking to you about it. I'm actually, I guess I was sharing a moment ago that I'm here to share with you the amazing things that God has been making happen in our church, and also to talk to you about what your congregation can do to help help Los Angeles in the area of affordable housing. I don't know how to make the notes work with this thing, so I'm working from a printed copy to remind myself, so please forgive me about that. There we go. Okay. So I think that if you are what we would call a good person, or we think of as a good or kind person, I know you know in your heart that reaching out to others in need is the right thing to do. As Christians, we share a fundamental belief about this. To summarize Matthew 22:37 through 39, love God and love your neighbor, the two greatest commandments. And those are amazing. And for those of us who have done and do mission work, those are life-changing words. Love your neighbor as yourself. But who does that really? Who can do that? Who can do that? And I'm 62 next week, and I got to say that I've been in and around in churches for my entire life, and I haven't met very many people who could actually love their neighbor as themselves. And I think the reason for that is that it is enough to have good intentions, right? Or to regard your neighbors positively or with affection and goodwill. As Stephen Covey wrote in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, love is a verb. Love is a thing that you have to do in order for it to be real, and it demands action. And so when you go to Sunday service, when you read the Bible, when you pray, those things are actions. Those things are actions. And to love your neighbor, it requires that you move beyond thoughts and into the world of getting something done. And as Shakespeare famously wrote, that's the rub, isn't it? Because some things are really, really difficult to do. And affordable housing is one of those things, as is homelessness. So I guess I'd like to ask you why you think that our churches, aren't doing more about affordable housing or about homelessness. Does anybody have, we know it's a really big problem, but we're not really doing that much about it. When you think about, say, in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, which I was there running a furniture bank program, and Christian missions rebuilt that city. I mean, it was a huge nationwide effort. There are thousands. We had the facility I was staying at, the church, it was a former church that had been completely flooded. And so we put our programs in there. They had 500 volunteers a day going out, and they, over the course of years, gutted 5,000 homes so they could return them to, use. But Los Angeles hasn't seen anything like that from its churches. It's arguably a worse humanitarian disaster. We have 40,000 people who are homeless on any given night in the city of Los Angeles. We have many people who are what's called housing cost burdened, which means that they're paying more than they can afford for housing. So why doesn't Los Angeles do more? And why don't the churches in Los Angeles in particular do more about this? And I think that the answer to that question is that we feel powerless to really do anything meaningful. These are such large problems. And so individually and as members of a worship community, what are we going to do? I mean, the cost numbers are unbelievable. 700,000 in Los Angeles to build one unit of housing, affordable housing. 40,000, I think I mentioned, homeless in the streets every night. And staggering numbers of people who are really one bad day away from homelessness. And so these are big, hard problems. And I think as churches, we now this isn't one of our plates, but the amount of money that's shown on that is fairly representative of what's been coming in lately. We don't think we have the personal resources or the financial resources to help. And this is why I'm so excited about what you're doing and the forum you're getting and the encouragement you're giving to doing work with homelessness and to listen to what we can maybe do about affordable housing. So I don't think any of you would be surprised by this, but over the past 10 years, this is what's happened to tithes and offerings at Sherman Oaks Presbyterian Church. Back in 2012, we were bringing in about $143,000 in that. And by the end of this year, as a projection, we will receive just over $30,000 on the plate in donations from the people who attend our church. Taken together with facility rentals and investments on our investments we have, we could not keep our church going through March of any year if we relied solely on these sources of income. And the problem's been getting worse for a long time. This chart shows the change in net assets 2000 through 2022 at Sherman Oaks Presbyterian. And that high point on the left there is 2005. And then we had a time of declining revenue growth, during which our assets dropped by almost $450,000. And then since that low point, with God's hand upon us, we have been able to achieve a tremendous change in our circumstances and in our capacities as a church. What we did to do that was that we changed our business model. Instead of wishing that God would keep things the way they used to be, we put our faith in what God is providing for us now. And so our financial focus changed to operating programs that would, number one, are informed by Christian faith. And second, do things that people are willing to pay for. And we started with growing our nursery school. We had a new classroom every year, even after COVID-19 temporarily closed the school. And we brought previously empty rooms back to life and the sound of children's voices. As a result of this, we were able to grow our revenue from just under $400,000 a year in 2017 to almost $1 million now. And that's an estimate for 2022. And we are earning in this year so far, in the first 5 months, $25,000 a month from our nursery school program. I bring this up because the reason why we're getting into housing ministry is that even though we put together this terrific Christ-centered curriculum at our nursery school and grown it and been rewarded with more money and success, it isn't going to be enough to keep our church in operation long term, because without new revenue, your expenses always grow, and without new revenue, you lose ground. And many churches in this presbytery and generally across the country have been losing ground because they're in that situation. And so if everything goes as we hope it to, our nursery school build out is going to be done by the end of 2024. And so we have no more room on our church campus to do anything else with that. And so we have started to look for another faith-based program that we could start that has the potential to provide the new revenue that we need to be financially healthy. And again, that the two criteria we have are that it's Christ-centered, it does things that churches are called to do, and then it raises net revenue. And ideally something that we can develop away from our church campus, because there's not much room here left for things. So this spring, as was mentioned, we applied for a small grant from the presbytery that in a fit of recklessness they approved, and which was that we needed some staff time to develop a plan to begin producing affordable housing. A housing ministry that would start to develop affordable housing for use in Los Angeles. And I'm here now today because they approved that, and we're already working pretty hard at it. The big idea here is that while traditional affordable housing costs around $700,000 per unit in Los Angeles, you can do tiny houses at a fraction of that cost. You can buy and place a movable tiny house as an accessory dwelling unit, for example, in Los Angeles for around $80,000, including the cost of purchasing it and placing it, paying the fees for the city fees for that. So that's almost a factor of 10 cheaper than regular affordable housing. But it does the same job. It gets someone housed who otherwise could not afford that. And that really opens the door for churches and other nonprofit organizations that aren't the big nonprofit developers. It gives a way for us to work in this field and on these problems that we just didn't have before. And it's really because there have been some changes in laws. And I want to talk to you a little bit about those new laws that have come into effect that have created this opportunity. So the first one was in 2017, where a California state law went into effect. It was SB 1069, and that's a state law that really made it hard for cities to refuse to put obstacles to creating accessory dwelling units. Now, what accessory dwelling units are? They're granny units, they're back houses, they're garage conversions, they're smaller units that in addition to a single family residence can be legally used to house people. And the cities in California were famously terrible about, or difficult about, they were creating rules really that blocked the use of it. You could only use so many a year. They had just one thing after the other. And so very few ADUs were being developed during over many years. And so in 2017, the state put a stop to it and created this law that basically makes it a very quick process to put an ADU on a single family residence property. In 2017 also, California passed AB 932, which assisted cities in creating more low-cost shelter. And then in October of 2018, the city of Los Angeles used that law to declare a shelter emergency. This opened the way for projects like you see with Hope of the Valley and the shelter villages that they're operating now. In 2020, the Los Angeles greenlighted the use of movable tiny houses as accessory dwelling units. So before that, you had to hire a contractor and get a permit and put a tiny house built on your property if you wanted to have one. When the city changed their rules on that, it meant that you could apply for a permit in a very quick way, and then roll a already built movable tiny house into your backyard. You have to put some hookups in, which I've done that for a project up in Santa Rosa, and it took us a couple of months to do that for the permitting and the work. And boom, you've got an ADU like that. And so it really lowered the cost of doing ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and increased the speed tremendously. And so there's been this huge burst of activity in ADUs since these laws. The last significant change to state law, which just happened in January, is called SB 9. Has anybody heard of SB 9? No, okay. It was very controversial. It basically allows you to, for the purposes of creating affordable housing only, to split a single family residence lot, build a second single family residence on it, and then put accessory dwelling units behind each of those houses. And so it's possible for amounts that affordable housing developers would scoff at, that would not be worth their time. It's possible to now develop an affordable housing community or a workforce housing community. Say, for example, nursery school teachers, that is achievable for smaller organizations or a group of them working together to come up with the money for it. So these were incredibly important changes that now that have just created this great opportunity for us. Okay. So I want to go over now the types of units that are available, both for homelessness and for affordable housing, so that when we get into talking about the kinds of projects that are being done already and that we might be able to be a part of doing, it'll make a little more sense. So these are called let's say, actually, I guess what I wanted to tell you is that tiny house ADUs, that's both fixed foundation and movable, they are used in SB 9 co-housing developments and church parking lot villages. In Los Angeles now, you can use tiny shelters, and also a safe overnight parking are used as ways to provide safe shelter for the homeless. This right here is what's known as a tiny shelter. You may have heard of these here called tiny houses, but they're not actually houses. They're shelters. And the reason why that they're tiny shelters and not tiny houses is because they're just rolling bedrooms. They don't have a kitchen. They don't have a bathroom. They don't have really, I mean, they're nothing except a place to sleep. And then you have to have other facilities on site to make, as you would with in a regular shelter, to provide those other things. This shelter is at Sherman Oaks Presbyterian. A couple of years ago, we partnered with American Tiny House Association to place 2 portable individual shelters, one here at Sherman Oaks and the other at Silver Lake Community Church. And we have had a homeless veteran, his name is Pedro, living in that since that time. He was previously living in our courtyard. And it's been a very useful thing. I mean, he's a chronically homeless guy. He's been living outdoors for 30 years. He's not interested in being housed, but he was willing to accept our shelter. And sometimes we still find him sleeping on the in a doorway or on the sidewalk. But this has completely eliminated all of his stuff that was around that we were throwing away and then he was having to dig out. And whereas before we had homeless people sleeping in our courtyard every night, because he's there, nobody sleeps over there anymore. And that was a great source of consternation for us, that our staff would have to walk into our buildings stepping over people who were sleeping, and there would be cigarette butts and pee, like right next to the pastor's doorway. At any rate, we have successfully used that for a couple of years now, and it's not a perfect solution, but it's been really good for us. And Silver Lake, I think, has used it for more temporary people. And I don't know, were they on? Was he on here already? He hasn't presented yet. He's done some good things over there, and this has been one small. The one he got has been one small part of it. Let's see. So another development of tiny shelters has been tiny shelter communities. And again, as I mentioned, Hope of the Valley has been a prime mover and shaker of these. And they have developed 6 of Los Angeles's 7 such communities. And they have a total of 909 beds for homeless people, 2 in each one of these little shelters. Now, unlike traditional shelter or affordable housing projects, these things can be put in incredibly quickly and at a really a fraction of the cost. Each 64-foot tiny shelter has 2 beds and is equipped with heat, air conditioning, windows, and a small desk and a front door. And then the other facilities are around it. And so it's been a really successful thing. We are nowhere near having all of our homeless sheltered, but if we get there, it's going to be because we do more of these kinds of projects. To the best of my knowledge, none of these are housed at churches. But the next category of shelter is something that is being done in churches in Los Angeles now. And that's called safe overnight parking. Have any of you heard of safe overnight parking? It was one of the first. I was so excited when I found out about that. And I actually tried to see if we could do it at Sherman Oaks. But we really only have one small parking lot and it wasn't thought to be suitable for this. But a safe overnight parking program is what it says. It's a place to park your car overnight while you're living in your car. And it provides a supervised shelter place for homeless people who have their own vehicles. Some of them have been churches, also in synagogues. And those organizations include United Methodist Church in North Hills, Prince of Peace Episcopal Church, and Synagogue Congregation ICAR, if I'm saying that correctly. All have small safe overnight parking. And it's sad to call this shelter, but it's better than what Los Angeles' main plan for shelter is, which is that Los Angeles shelters people in the street. That's what we do. That's our plan. And we all know that. That's why you have tent communities everywhere, because our plan for the homeless in Los Angeles right now is to shelter them in the street. We have maybe the capacity to shelter just a small percentage of the people who are displaced. And so things like safe overnight parking and tiny shelters are the things that we have the most capacity to increase. Moving from homelessness to housing, the tiny house was developed originally by the movable tiny house in particular, by individual people who did self-builds, who were trying to gain control over their largest cost, which is the cost of their housing. Housing costs have been spiraling out of control. I think we've all seen, I know, I think I read it was up like 30% overall in 1 year. And it's been going up faster than incomes for many years. And what that's done is it's just placed tremendous pressure on people to stay housed, the lower income people. And so tiny houses came about as a way of them doing much smaller housing that wasn't attached to land, so that they could, I mean, there have been some that built their home for $10,000. And as that developed, there were builders started getting involved and doing kind of higher quality houses. And then as that became more of a phenomenon, places all over the country started asking, well, how can we use tiny houses to solve some of our problems? How can we house the homeless with them? How can we create affordable housing for our workforce, for retired people, for poorer people? And so unlike tiny shelters, which just is really, again, a rolling bedroom, tiny houses have facilities for all activities of daily living. You got a kitchen, you've got a bathroom, a shower, a living room, and then a place to sleep, either a loft or separate bedrooms. Sometimes two 400 square foot tiny houses will often have 2 bedrooms in them. And their size typically ranges between 150 and 400 square feet. And it's surprising how much you can do with 400 square feet if you're ingenious. These are classified under California state law as RVs, but as I mentioned earlier, Los Angeles's new tiny house ordinance, new ADU ordinance, allows them to be placed as accessory dwelling units on single-family residence properties, and making it faster and less expensive to deploy affordable housing. So accessory dwelling units, which I've mentioned before, they are separate living quarters with that have all of the activities of daily living in it. They have a kitchen, a sink, bedroom, or they're like a studio, but they're like little houses you can put behind your main house. And as I mentioned before, their use has really picked up, both the fixed foundation, which is I think what you see here, and also the movable kind. And so we think that the best way to start developing housing for maybe our teachers in our nursery school, and for people who we've been losing people. Our church has been losing people every year to the pressure of the high cost of housing. They can't stay here. They can't live here. In fact, there are two of our members who just left, who moved to Florida because they can't afford to live here. They can have a better life somewhere else. And so one reason we are thinking about, we're wanting to become involved in housing development, is to maybe we can use it to stop the bleeding a bit and create housing that our church members and our staff can afford to live in. And so putting these relatively inexpensive units behind houses is a way of doing that. The next kind of development that can be done is what's called an SB9 development. And that was, as I mentioned before, you take a lot and you split it in half. You can legally split it in half and then build a second house on it. Like, so you started with the one in orange over there to the left. And then you can build this on the other parcel, you can build a second house. And then on each of those parcels, you can put an accessory dwelling unit. And so basically you've got, if you follow a co-housing model, where you might have 2 or 3 bedrooms in those houses, you have housing for perhaps 8 people or so, at a cost of under $200,000 per person, which is far cheaper than you can develop affordable housing really in any other method. And so the idea is to purchase single-family resident properties, split them, bring in a small modular house, and then roll in 2 ADUs, tiny house ADUs that might actually belong to the people who are moving in, so that you don't have to pay for that part of the development. And so for, between 700,000 and $1.5 million, depending on the area, you can create a co-housing community that the people who are living in it actually can own themselves at a price that they can afford, at a price that allows them to continue to be here and part of our community and part of the wider community of Los Angeles. The next kind of thing that tiny houses are used for is one that I've loved since I first heard the idea of it. It's called a church lot development, and it's a tiny house village on a church property. Sometimes they're put onto a just some land that has not been developed that the church owned, and sometimes they're built actually on church parking lots. The one that's pictured right here is it's called Goodness Village. It was developed, or it was put on a property of Crosswinds Church in Livermore. They have 28 tiny houses, and these were brought in as movables. The company that built them, California Tiny House, he's actually a board member of American Tiny House Association, and they did really fine work on this housing development. It was an example of a great partnership between a church and a nonprofit organization and the tiny house industry to create affordable housing that otherwise just couldn't be done. But this isn't the only example of it. There's a First Presbyterian Church of Hayward opened a village with spaces for 6 units in 2020. And then there's an organization called Yigby. Yes, in God's backyard. That that's the play on the word NIMBY, right? And what they're aspiring to do is to help congregations create a triple bottom line in which where they are providing mission-driven housing solutions using environmentally sustainable materials and contributing to their own financial well-being. And of course, that last thing, it gets my ears pricked up, right? Because for us, for Sherman Oaks, we would like to earn a revenue from the development of affordable housing, and in particular, investment income, investing endowment income, raising money for an endowment, and investing that in partnership with nonprofit developers to provide the upfront money to purchase property and to create affordable housing. And so this idea is called blended returns, where you're following a purpose, a Christ-centered purpose. In this case, we are providing relief to people who are housing cost burdened, and we have a lot of those people in Los Angeles. But we would also be getting money back from that investment, an investment return. And it's a really strong model, and I think it's I'm going to show you in a moment another Presbyterian organization that has used that model very effectively to really pay for their future, to form their primary source of revenue. And I wanted to, so these are all California projects that I've shown you, Los Angeles projects, California projects. I wanted to bring to your attention some really amazing projects around the country, two in particular. This is Community First Village in Austin. I actually have lived there or stayed there for 2 nights. If you look at the far right of the screen, I think it's right. It's where they'll say the words community cinema. You see the words community cinema up there? So if you see that little arc of little rectangles, the second to last one on the bottom is a tiny house. They're all tiny houses or Airstream trailers. And that second to the bottom one is a tiny house with a seaside resort theme inside. And when I went to the Tiny House Jamboree in Austin, I stayed there in that unit and was able to walk the grounds of this development. And my, oh my, it is really something. So it's a 51-acre master planned community in Austin, Texas, that provides affordable permanent housing and supportive community for over 500 men and women who are coming out of chronic homelessness. It's a development done by basically a nonprofit developer called Mobile Loaves and Fishes. And this program exists to love and serve our neighbors who have been living on the streets, while also empowering the surrounding community into a lifestyle of service with and for the homeless. This Christian nonprofit organization raised $60 million to buy this land and build this out in 2 phases. It's extraordinary. It is really, I mean, this is, these are, a lot of these, you can see they're much smaller things, and they're really shelters served by a lot of community facilities. But it is the largest and best development in the country using tiny houses and shelters just to really take a big whack out of the need that's in their community. This next thing has only recently come to my attention, but I'm very excited about it. It's actually featured in this book, We Aren't Broke, which I'm going to talk to you about it in a minute. This is Prez House, Prez House Apartments in the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And the story behind this is that the campus ministry there was running out of money, and they were kind of making their last roll of the dice, right, to see if they would continue as an organization. And what they decided to do was borrow $17 million and build a student apartment building. It took them a while to make that happen, but it worked. It worked. The co-pastors, Erica Liu and Liu, if I'm saying that right, and Mark Elsden, kind of became famous as the promoters of what's called impact investing, which is that you're not investing just for a return, but also to make a community impact. And that's in mission work, like to accomplish your mission. And Elsden wrote this book about their experience, and which was recommended to me by Nick Warnes, and I wholeheartedly recommend it to you. It's called We Aren't Broke, Mark Elsden. And if you can't buy it, I'll be happy to buy a copy for you, because it's actually really transformational in how it thinks about mission work and funding mission work, which is as a source of capital to create mission-related projects that provides a return. It's really quite a thing, and they made it work financially, and now it provides the core of their their annual revenue. It's the main thing for them, and they're on good financial grounds now. So I wanted to just recap these options that I've shown to you about what they cost, just so you get some idea of the range of things that can be done. So the tiny shelters that I showed you, both the portable one that we have placed, or the American Tiny House Association has placed at 2 of our churches, or the ones that Hope of the Valley do. You can pay to have those done, and it will cost you $3,000. You can actually literally call up Hope of the Valley, as I'm going to recommend that you do, and say, I want to sponsor a tiny shelter, and they'll charge you $3,000, and at their next development, one of yours will go in. placing an existing movable tiny house onto behind a single family residence in Los Angeles. The cost of the permits and the electrical work and the plumbing work and the sewer connection. It's about $10,000. I myself have done one. I placed the first movable tiny house in Santa Rosa up in Sonoma County under their what they called their Resilient Cities Ordinance, which was for its time really groundbreaking. And so it took us a couple of months from start to finish, and mostly because they hadn't done, and that was the reason I got involved, and I got American Tiny House Association involved in doing it, was because they had an ordinance that was wonderful and that could help people, and nobody was using it. And it's a hard thing, but if you haven't seen it being done, if the department itself doesn't even know how to do it because they've never done one, the planning department, it's really it's pretty off-putting. Nobody wants to be the first one to try something, and so but we did that, and what we found out was it cost about $10,000 to do it. About $10,000 takes about 3 months. If you wanted to buy a movable tiny house and place it on behind a single family residence in Los Angeles, it'll cost you around $80,000. And it's a little bit more than it was. The cost of building materials has gone up quite a bit because of the economic consequences of COVID. Construction costs are up, and so it's going to cost you about $80,000 to do that. The SB 9 co-housing developments that I talked to you about, between 700,000 and 1.5 million, depending on where you do it. We're kind of thinking about maybe Antelope Valley for a first one, where it's a lot less expensive. And we have some community organizations there that are already working on making a female veterans project, bringing that together with tiny houses. And then church lot development. So there's a couple of kinds of church lot developments. I showed you a few of them. Some of them can be tiny house villages on parking lots with above ground hookups, utilities, or they can be developed on church property that's not the parking lot and put on fixed foundation with below ground utility hookups. But beyond that, as I showed to you, you can do mixed use developments like Pres House, where they're providing housing to students, but they're also using that as a community center, as a focus for their campus ministry. Another thing that Sherman Oaks Presbyterian is actively considering is that we have one building that right now has it used to be the caretaker's cottage, and right now we are renting it to a ceramic studio. But we think that we would like to finish building out our nursery school and wanting to put another nursery school room in there. But the alternative we're looking at is, what if we did a 2 or 3 story building instead? Put 2 classrooms of nursery school. Remember, we clear about $5,000 per month for each nursery school classroom we have. So by putting 2 nursery school classrooms at the bottom of a building, that's for us about $10,000 a month free and clear to support our other work. And then doing housing on the next floor or 2 up, connecting it to our existing nursery school building that has a 2nd floor, and you can't bring preschoolers up to a 2nd floor. So those rooms are basically sitting there unusable for anything. And so we would convert that to housing too. And so we would create an affordable housing development for our own workforce. Preschool teachers are among the worst paid people in Los Angeles, and it it really, I mean, they make minimum wage or entry level, and it's really getting hard and competitive to keep them. But because typically you don't make all that much money with preschools, it's really hard to pay them enough and still have it be a way to support the organization financially. So we're looking at maybe a mixed use development there that would do housing and program services, in our case, a nursery school. So these are the kind, and my main point on that is that the kinds of projects you can do on your own church campus, well, they're the easiest to get to because we already own the land. They really vary tremendously, from 17 million for student apartments to something much, much less if you were just going to put tiny houses on a parking lot. So I want to talk to you for a moment because I promised you that I was going to ask you for your help. So we are currently developing our plan for this. We've done all this research, some of which I've shared with you. We have some program models in mind in partnership with other nonprofit organizations that have more expertise, particularly in the building and the housing development side. And in partnership with nonprofits and churches that we hope will just take a tiny little step into the world of impact investing. We would like, to start earning money for you too. And so when you're considering what money you're going to be putting into mission work, consider making a loan rather than a gift and getting an annual return on that. I don't have a prospectus for you yet. We still are discussing it and what we're doing, but we do expect to be able to pay something like 6% on money that we would use as hard money investment into the development of affordable housing projects. Probably in the beginning, it's going to be putting in tiny house pads for $10,000, or maybe buying into developments that other nonprofits are doing as tiny house developments and having 2 or 3 of them be affordable housing for participants that we have. And so I'll come back to you with that, but I would love it if you all would think about and bring to your church the idea of exploring how to add to your annual income while achieving something important in mission work in Los Angeles. The key points for our program is that we know that LA's housing affordability crisis isn't going to be solved by existing resources. There isn't enough money. Much smaller housing is really a game changer, and an innovation needs to happen, and we can be part of that. We are hoping to do pilot projects intended to fund small micro housing developments, intended to help the people who are part of that achieve home ownership of micro housing, at the $150,000 to $200,000 per unit level. And the most important piece of that isn't there yet is hard money construction financing, money to purchase property, money to build buildings. We are putting away a lot of money. We have added $450,000 to our net assets in the past 4 years. So we've started to save, and we're gaining on it a lot. We certainly will talk to the Presbytery about their interest in participating, and we're going to come talk to you and see if you want to kick in too to help make one of these first tiny house developments happen. I mentioned the book. Here's a picture of it. We Aren't Broke: Uncovering Hidden Resources for Mission and Ministry. I recommend you get that. That is my presentation. I hope I didn't go over too long. No, I think I did it. So I'm available now for question and answers. Fire away. Anybody have anything you wanted to ask?
You have us all on mute.
Oh, I don't even, who, let's
You can
see.
unmute yourself.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think you unmute yourself.
exactly, yeah.
That is correct.
Okay, great. Yes.
Michelle had a question.
Yes.
Okay, Michelle.
At one point you were discussing the building a nursery school and then having affordable housing above that. One of the big concerns I think that we've had, because we have at our church a preschool as well as now a IB school at
Okay.
our church, and
Sorry, which church are you at?
First Presbyterian Church of Granada Hills.
Okay, great.
Granada Hills, yeah.
Okay.
And one of the big concerns, especially when we were considering LA safe parking, was the children being exposed to the part of homelessness that we don't necessarily know, if there's things that go on that we don't, I actually work at San Fernando Valley Rescue Mission, so I'm very familiar with what goes on and
Okay.
how to work with homeless people. And sometimes you can't always predict how, the homeless interact with children. So, or the children or parents interact with homeless. That would be my question, is how do you mix that? How do you mix that?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think maybe I wasn't very clear in my presentation around that. You
Mhm.
don't mix that. Housing that we would do above our nursery school would be for nursery school teachers.
Oh, I see. Okay, so the teachers that work at the,
Yes. In
and
order,
then this way they can afford housing.
we would provide affordable housing as part of their benefits package.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
May I also add to that, because you mentioned safe parking. And I know other groups that have safe parking, there's an hour at which everyone must leave. They can't just continue to stay there. So the vehicle must leave the premises and cannot come back until a later hour. So
Yes,
that's very
exactly.
important.
Like
Yeah.
7
Boundaries are
o'clock
important.
in the morning or something like that, we heard.
6 o'clock. I think it was 6 o'clock in the morning.
6 o'clock.
Yeah, that's what I remember. And then they said something like they come in at 7 or 8 in the night, and then they leave at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's it. But I want to go kind of beyond that to talk about it conceptually. Tiny shelters are great to shelter homeless people. Okay. The unfortunate thing is that the very best solution to homelessness, the method that provides the most success in returning people who have been homeless to back into a more settled life, is called Housing First. And Housing First, if for those of you who aren't familiar with that concept, basically says you get people into housing, you provide services, and that will create the circumstances necessary for them to mainstream and get settled again. And without housing, they're too strung out. Their life is too unsettled to really do the work they need to do to get and keep a job and all the other things that we normally think of as our normal parts of our life. All of those things are really hard if you don't have an address or know where you're going to be eating or sleeping every day. And so that's the best, that it improves your percentage chance of not returning to homelessness a lot. And you can't do Housing First without the housing.
Yeah.
You can't. And that's where Los Angeles is really struggling, is that we have all these homeless people and we can put them in shelters, but they have to be housed. And we don't have that housing. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, if you're going to start doing housing, if you're using a grassroots housing development strategy like what we're talking about, you're going to use the easiest ones first. You're going to build housing for employees, right? You're going to build housing for people you already know and trust, and have them be the first communities, because there's less that will go wrong. Nonprofits that have expertise in helping the homeless, and I've worked with many of them. I used to run a furniture distribution program before I realized that housing was the problem and not furniture, and switched to this. Groups are going to need to partner in to provide housing specific to their needs. Anybody, any other questions?
I have one.
Yes, Lorna.
The way you have described, only the nursery school teachers, that's great. The people who are maybe on their way to being housed, is kind of the cream of the crop. And the people who are hardcore homeless, I don't know this, not just for what you're talking about, but we have over in North Hollywood, I visited the little house community over there, and it is how do you call it, policed. There's a gate and a guard shack, and I don't know exactly what kind of monitoring happens there, but I have this concern about building these things and having them destroyed.
So again, I wonder, there are tiny shelters,
Mhm,
and then there are tiny houses.
mhm,
Affordable housing, housing that tiny housing
mhm.
is for people who have jobs or income, who can't afford, I mean, like this concept, who are priced out of the market.
Okay,
And that really is everybody at our church except the pastor and maybe the nursery school director.
Hmm.
All of those people are really can't buy a home. They're not going to own a home. And and the housing is for that. The housing is for homeowners. It's to create home ownership, and you can't build home ownership on homeless people. So it's not for homeless people.
No, I see, I see.
It's a housing ownership program.
I see. All right.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Jean,
Kevin, you spoke about possible community being put together out in the Antelope Valley. And I'm sure there are homeless people there as well as downtown LA and a lot of the overpasses. But it seems to me to put in housing out in the suburbs when it's a real urban area that might be able to provide income in the way of jobs and work would be a better approach than out beyond transportation and
Mhm.
trains and buses and the things that people can take advantage of.
Right. No, and I know that that's a big problem in working with homelessness is the tendency to want to shove them out to cheaper places that don't have as many services.
Mhm.
But we're not talking about that kind of thing with housing. With housing, we're talking about resident-owned communities where they would get a $200,000 loan and own their parking spot for their tiny house and own their tiny house and share that space with the other people living next door in a what used to be a single family residence lot that is now a co-housing community. So we're talking about creating housing community that people will own. Because none of those people, none of our people, so many of our people can't, are losing their place because they can't afford housing.
Kevin, I just want to say, like,
Yeah.
this was excellent information. And I think there's a lot of people within the Presbytery who listen to this. So I'm gonna make sure we get this out, including some of our committees. that actually deal with property and finance, perhaps. This would be a great presentation for them to listen to, because we are always looking at ways to deal with property in presbyteries. And so this gives people a new idea perhaps to think about. And I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think that, I mean, I don't think anybody looks forward to the opportunity to convert the property of a church that has gone out of, that has closed. That's a source of sadness for me, because I don't think it's necessary. I think that things can be done to prevent that. But I do think that when that does happen, there is a chance to look at doing housing, affordable housing, and workforce housing, and also nursery schools, to create a development that where a new church plant basically could be funded by those two programs. And so that's a thing that I will be talking to them about going forward, is the chance to maybe try that out. If you know, the worst comes to the worst, we get another one that will go out of business. I do want to point out that I have put up, because I said that I would, 3 things that you can do now with homelessness or affordable housing, which is sponsor a tiny shelter with Hope of the Valley. I've provided their website address. Donate to Safe Overnight Parking. I don't know that Safe Overnight Parking is taking any new locations. They're county funded and mostly, and so I don't know that there's any way to do one for your church to do one now. There might be, but I know that sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. So I went the safe way and say just you know, you can give money to them, and that will help what they do. And then I'd like to encourage you all to start or consider starting an affordable housing endowment fund, which is basically you just ask for donations one Sunday, and then put it into a separate account, and try to accumulate that for a while. And when we're at a place where we are able to start this, which I don't think will be very long from now, we'll come back to you and say, hey, look, help us do this, help us build this. So again, thank you all for being here for my presentation.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Well, I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I don't know what I was thinking in tiny homes, but this opened my eyes
Thank
to all
you.
the different things that churches can do. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we will say good night and goodbye. And thank you again, Kevin.
All right, take
Thank
care.
you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.